Canadians are known for having a social conscience, and so our political leaders need to do more to uphold that reputation on the international stage. A beard and a turban sometimes conjure up negative associations, but if you see someone with a lime-colored, bright orange or pink turban, it disarms people's stereotyped notion of this image. My dad struggled younger in his life and eventually had become very well settled and bought a nice car for himself. And every now and then I'd take it for a spin and, almost without fail, if I took his car I'd get pulled over. It takes courage to love yourself when you've been told your whole life that you're ugly, or dirty, or a terrorist. To me, poverty, mental health, and addictions don't sound like criminal justice problems. They sound to me like a social justice problem. I don't work for the rich and powerful. I work for people. There is no excuse for inaction in the face of economic injustice. Increasingly, we're seeing two worlds in Canada. The world for most Canadians is increasingly unaffordable, involves more precarious work, and is a harder place in which to get by. The second world is an exclusive club for the wealthy and well-connected who get special access and are exempt from rules the rest of us play by. The same way I'm not afraid of calling out systemic discrimination, I'm also not afraid of calling out inequality in the fact that inequality is growing in society and that affects everybody, regardless of race. Sikhs were considered the champions of fairness, uplifting people, protecting and defending human rights, defending equality. So when someone sees a Sikh, the turban identifies a person who's going to stand up for rights, even if you disagree with them. The turban is supposed to be a beacon. That's someone who is going to help you out. In difficult economic times, I'm firmly opposed to austerity. Terrorism is perpetrated by individuals and cannot be blamed on any one religion, be it Sikhism, Islam, Hinduism, Buddhism, or Christianity. Tax avoidance and evasion by the rich undermine democracy by starving social programs and public services. They also send a message to ordinary citizens that the rules of the economic game are rigged against them. We have to fight climate change like we actually want to win. I have experienced things that I think many Canadians have gone through: the feeling of not belonging, the feeling of being a victim, of being hurt, being marginalized. What do we believe in? Love and courage. There's no excuse in 2019, with the wealth we have as a nation, with the technology we have as a country, that we cannot clean this water, ensure that all communities have clean drinking water. For any kid who feels like a newcomer, who feels like they don't belong, my candidacy says, not only do you belong, you can also aspire to run this country. In the Sikh tradition there is no prohibition of showing your hair. It's not that hair cannot be seen, it's an identity, as opposed to having to cover your hair. Indigenous communities have suffered horribly as a result of residential schools. Oh, I think Canadians look like all sorts of people. That's the beauty of Canada. We need to truly understand what economic injustice and inequality looks like for hardworking Canadians grappling with it every day on the ground, at home and at work. We need to recognize that it is growing economic inequality that creates the conditions for hate to fester. Let me assure you that New Democrats will support a bold agenda to tackle inequality, even though it is certain to encounter strong opposition from vested interests. Inequality is on the rise in Canada, and those at the top have no idea what life is like for most Canadian families. I know how important it is to have affordable and reliable access to cell and internet services. People shouldn't be forced to choose between paying for rent or paying for medication. They deserve a government ready to take on big pharma by implementing health coverage, starting by extending pharmacare coverage to every Canadian. It's heartbreaking to think that the joy of building a family is being dimmed by the economic squeeze young people are feeling. The higher the stakes, the more responsible we have to be. It was with this in mind that I began to build my green economy and climate agenda. It's no secret that there are people who would like to narrow our discussions on climate change to a debate about pipelines alone in an attempt to divide Canadians, to pit workers against environmentalists. Communities and workers should be partners at the table, not waiting on the sidelines while government and the fossil fuel industry dictate climate policy. No climate plan can leave workers and communities behind nor trample the rights of Indigenous communities. Canadians must have opportunity and income security during economic transformation. Beyond advocating for greater access to consumer markets abroad, we need to go one step further and advocate for a higher quality of life for the people who are the driving force behind them. As Canadians who proudly demand the equal treatment of minorities, religious freedom, gender equality, and basic human rights for its citizens, allowing our political leaders to shamefully ignore these values in the name of business abroad, falls short of the high standard we rightfully set for ourselves. Fighting for human rights, a commitment to social justice and treating people with dignity are all things that are important to us as Canadians. One of the things that I wanted to do in all aspects of my life is to tear down barriers. And, I feel those barriers exist for any racialized person. They particularly exist for people who are very visible, so a visible minority or someone who expresses their faith visibly. My style has allowed me to tear down barriers in day-to-day life with people who would otherwise have a negative stereotype of someone who wears a turban, but also to speak to people on Bay Street, professionals who don't really think of New Democrats as an option. If the concern is security, there needs to be evidence-backed policies to increase security and safety, while maintaining our liberties and freedoms. Policies that clamp down on freedoms and don't increase security empirically need to be outright rejected. If someone doesn't like Saudi Arabia's human rights record, that doesn't mean that you are in any way attacking Muslims. You're attacking a government's policies and track record. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau says nice words, but he's really all about looking out for his rich and powerful friends, just like the Conservatives. Every single day of my life is about challenging people who think you can't do something because of the way you look. We've shown people that you don't have to be taken for granted. You don't have to settle for less. We need to, as a society, collectively, unequivocally denounce any time innocent lives are lost. Air India happened when I was about 5 years old, but I've attended memorials with respect to the victims and the families, the survivors of this horrible and heinous act. I've talked about how everyone denounces it. All Canadians stand together united against any forms of violence, terror against Canadians, and, in fact, against anyone around the world. I denounce anyone held responsible for any act of violence perpetrated against any innocent lives. It is just unacceptable. It is, fundamentally, something that we all denounce. I can tell you as a leader of a party that I'm fundamentally opposed to violence, fundamentally opposed to any innocent lives being taken, fundamentally opposed to any violence being perpetrated against people. We need to start looking at some of the root causes of division. And one of the reasons why people are exploited to hate, to fear others, is that people are afraid in their own lives. There are a lot of people who can't find housing, who worry about the future, and that insecurity and precarity in their own lives is being exploited by some politicians who are using it to divide us by saying, hey, it's the fault of new Canadians, it's the fault of refugees, it's the fault of Muslims. Make it so people can actually find good housing, can find good quality jobs and can afford to live, then we can weaken the climate of insecurity and fear that allow people to be exploited to increase division. Visit our website for more quotes, quoting.com.